Alright, hi. So my name's Jonathan Brown. I've been wargaming for 30 plus years, something like that. I guess my route in was via my dad and his model railway obsession. I used to play with his model trains and did some airfix kits like tanks and planes and things. But I suppose really it began with then Hero Quest and Space Crusade, as for so many other gamers of roughly my age, I suppose. Then through that and going to the local model shop in Chichester, I picked up the original 40k Rogue Trader. Didn't really understand either the rules or the setting, but had some good games when I was quite young. And then it was second edition 40k, which was when I really understood what I was doing, was building armies, playing loads of games with friends and things. That was on as a teenager. And through that, obviously played Warhammer as well. I was aware of non-Games Workshop games and collected odd bits and pieces, but didn't really know what to do with them. So it wasn't until much later that I played any non-GW games. I would sometimes get historical wargames magazines from W.H. Smith's, and so again was aware of historical wargaming, even though I didn't really play it. I would sometimes collect some miniatures. And I guess over the years, tried a few different things. Didn't really do much gaming while I was at university, and then went and lived abroad for a few years, and gradually have kind of never completely left the hobby, but have kind of got more into it again in recent years, particularly over the last 10 years, I think. And over the last 3 or 4 years, I've made a much more deliberate effort to find time to paint, go to events where I know I will get games, like arrange games with friends and so on. And I suppose I can't really separate from role-playing games as well. I do think wargaming, role-playing are probably two separate hobbies, but there is overlap. And in terms of worlds, settings, scenarios, telling stories, those are the elements that I like about wargaming. And I obviously sometimes get that from role-playing as well. And board games. I think board games being more kind of self-contained, are often easier to get games, organise. It's easier to organise a board game generally than a war game. And also probably quite a bit easier to get in people to the hobby. So particularly in recent years, my wife and I, we've done a pretty good job, I think, of hosting games, nights, dinners and so on. So we set the games up, have friends over, and some of them have become really quite enthusiastic about board gaming, which has been really good fun. So speaking about introducing people to the hobby, or at least to the board gaming hobby, I've got a gigantic spreadsheet of all the games that I've got, many of which I've not played, some of which I have. And so we've always got favourite games, my wife and I, and games that we know have gone down well with friends that we've introduced to games. So I suppose when we know we're going to be playing some games with friends, particularly those that haven't played before, we'll obviously have a think about kind of what sorts of things that we enjoy doing with them, what kind of stories and media they like, whether we think they're up for kind of a bit more rules learning and kind of a bit more complex games, or whether they want to get straight into things. But we've become, I think, quite good now at knowing a few games which we know are always good fun to play, and we now know how to teach them as well. So yeah, it's been really, really good fun getting people in. I'd been trying to make more of a concerted effort to build and paint and play games in recent years. And so one of the things I've done over the last 6 months is taking part in an escalation league being run by the local hobby shop in Chichester. So an escalation league is one where you start small. So in your first game, you have a small army. You've got a bit of time to prepare, so you can build and paint a relatively small army. You play with basic rules, nothing too complex. And in my case, I was playing against an 8-year-old who still managed to beat me, but never mind. This was a Age of Sigmar escalation league. So I'd been have been collecting models for a whole range of games, but including Warhammer Age of Sigmar for quite a while, but never really had anything to do with them. Hadn't previously, I'd had tried the game many years ago and hadn't got into it. So this was a way really of, say, just getting some games and motivating myself to build and paint some stuff. And so every 2 to 3 months we have another game, so it gives you time to build and paint a bit more between games, so that each time you play the game gets bigger, and by the end of the league the idea is you've got a fully painted and built army. So I haven't got quite that far yet, but the league is still ongoing. But I've done more painting as a result of being part of this league than I have done for many years, so it's been good fun. I've been interested in historical war games for a long time. I'm a historian, I studied history at university. I've always been interested in history, and having always been interested in a variety of games and war games, just being aware of historical war games, just that was part of the ecosystem. So I've always been interested in those as well. I haven't tended to play many of them. I guess those games that I have played and collected models for have tended to be games that allow you to invent your own stories and scenarios in a historical period, rather than games where you're recreating a particular battle. So the sorts of games I've been more interested in have been either sort of pulpy versions of historical settings, or games which I think are often played in a very pulp way, like colonial wargaming. So I've played very few historical wargames, but the games which I have sort of taken an interest in have generally been published games. But that might mean just published in a magazine. It's not necessarily a sort of a professionally published product. And so I suppose colonial and pre-colonial African gaming, sort of that setting particularly interested me from a non-gaming perspective as well. That's sort of colonial and pre-colonial African history was something I spent a lot of time studying at uni, and so I'm quite interested in the pulp gaming, but I'm also interested in the real history as well. And it's interesting, given what I think we're going to be getting onto, is I think colonial gaming is one of the periods or settings which are probably more controversial. If you think there is controversy around the principle of historical gaming, then probably colonial gaming is one of the most controversial ways to do it, because you've got the whole kind of racing legacy of empire. But I say I had an interest as a non-gamer in that period of history and that part of the world as well. So that was, I suppose that was my kind of way into historical wargaming collecting. I have collected other periods and ranges as well, or dabbled rather than collected. I've not kind of created armies for them. And I have collected modern and sort of relatively near modern miniatures too. I guess I've been less interested in actually gaming in very modern settings, and I suppose that may have something to do with my personal issues to do with kind of wargaming some conflicts.